Okay, guys, just kind of jumping in here and going live just a few minutes early. Just want to make sure that anybody who happens to log on right at the right time, that I'm actually already live at that point in time. So, for those of you who are just logging in, this is an Ask Me Anything video. I do try to do these once a week. It's a live stream, and the point is for you to put questions, add them in the comment section. I will try to catch up to them here at some point in time and answer them as we go along. I think I'm trying to do a pretty good job of staying up with those when you post them. Do put in the @We the Govern, just so it's easy for me to spot the questions. Sometimes when I'm doing this, there's a lot of noise. A lot of people are putting in commentary back and forth, and so it's kind of hard for me to pick the questions out of there. But if I can see the question, then I'll be able to actually attempt to answer it. I want to apologize a little bit in advance. I've got a little bit of a cold. Don't know why this week. It's one of those things. I don't know if it was going out and spending too much time working in the woods over the weekend or razor clamming on Saturday. I'm not sure what it is, but one way or another, I just have a little bit of a cold. Hopefully that doesn't really affect this live stream today. For those of you that I saw Friday at the Let's Go Washington rally, at the Capitol, demanding that the legislature have hearings on the 6 initiatives, more than just the 3 that they currently have. It was good to see you. Thank you for coming up and introducing yourself to me and talking to me there. I love to meet people in person that subscribe to the channel or watch the live stream or kind of watch me on YouTube, or at least it means a lot to me. It's otherwise I don't really get to know always who's watching me. I do run into people in public a lot who do approach me all over the state. Not a surprise, because 78% of the people, or roughly, are from Washington State who watch this channel. But it's fun when you come up and talk to me, whoever you are. Make sure you tell me your name, just so I kind of know who you are. And I do appreciate knowing when I'm meeting somebody who does watch this YouTube channel. As I've mentioned before, it was never really my intention to be a YouTuber. That's not really ever something that I had thought about doing. And I've kind of fumbled into this over the years. Really just starting when I was at the Freedom Foundation so many years ago now, doing videos and trying to teach activists how to tell a story using video, the video progression, story arcs. And so I started demonstrating doing videos back then at the Freedom Foundation, and that kind of is what led to me eventually producing, or at least launching, my own channel here back in 2015 now, almost 10 years, not quite. However, one thing I do try to start out each of these live streams with, because people have asked me to do this in the past, is to let you know when I'm going to be speaking. Most of what I do is actually going out in the field and doing things, being active and meeting people in person, doing training or speaking engagements or whatever we need around the state. And I've been doing that for a long time. And so a quick update, if you happen to live in Okanagan, I will be out there Thursday. So today's Tuesday, that's 2 days from now. I'll be out there. That's a leap, if I remember right, that's the leap year day. So it's February 29th. And I'll be doing a presentation from 6 to 8 in Okanagan, the big and booming town of Okanagan. Haven't been out there in a little while, so it's kind of nice to get out there. I'm assuming the passes will clear up and I can get my junker car over both passes and get out there without too much trouble. And then Saturday, if you're in Lewis County and you're going to the Republican Lincoln Day dinner, I'm going to be the MC at that event. I didn't write down the exact start time, but if you look up the Lewis County Lincoln Day dinner, you'll see information about it, and I'll be the MC there. The following Thursday, I believe at least I've got it scheduled right now, that I'm going to be doing some activist training in Kitsap County as kind of a warm-up to the fact that Saturday, the Kitsap County Lincoln Day dinner, I will be the kind of a co-MC there as well. So I'm anticipating over the next couple weeks anyway, getting able to see quite a few of you out there. The following week, I'm doing some training of activists out of state, or I think it's probably more of a roundtable. We're probably mutually sharing information. And I'll be back in Alexandria doing some work with some other activists around the state. I haven't done that before. I've done it a few times, but I haven't gone back to D.C. I really don't like D.C., and I don't spend a lot of time back there. But At least I haven't for a long time. So it'll be interesting to go back there. It's just been a long time, so I'm interested in seeing how that goes, and if it's. And I'm going to be doing some stuff with the Leadership Institute, so we'll see how that works. But so mostly I'll be bouncing around the state quite a bit this week. Also managed to just get some downtime yesterday where I could stop in at a Starbucks while I was out driving around, and I filed 7 PDC complaints yesterday afternoon, which was good. I've had a lot piling up on my to-do list, and sometimes you get caught up and bogged down with other things. And so when I find when I'm doing PDC complaints, I just need to focus at least for 30 minutes or so to drop a couple more complaints in the hopper. And it had been a little while. I filed a really good one, I think, against the Washington Education Association PAC here a couple weeks ago, but I really needed to just get down and catch up. I've got hundreds of them. I just need to kind of start plowing through. So on my to-do list, it's always up there somewhere is, groups to file complaints on. Got some ethics complaints I've been working on as well. We'll be interested to see kind of where they go. If you followed my track record on the website, you'll see that I do try to keep updated. I haven't updated like the last 5 complaints, I think, that have been resolved as sanctions against different groups, but I'll try to catch up on that pretty soon. However, it's just a good thing. Everybody needs a hobby. That's one of mine. And catching politicians, judges, and PACs and other groups breaking the law is never a bad thing to do. And it's always good if we can hold them a bit more accountable, let them know that we're watching. Some of you, if you've taken some of my training classes, I have taught a lot of people how to do this. I realized the first, just if you have taken one of my classes on how to file PDC complaints or doing the research on how to do it, just keep in mind that your first couple complaints, it always feels a little, they're a little tenuous when you start that out. But once you get into the rhythm, really, you can file, or once you know what you're looking for, I mean, you can file, quite a few at a time if you want. There's a few other people I've noticed out there that are friends of mine or people who've taken some of this training in the past. I've noticed that they're starting to catch up and file complaints, which is great. So the more of those that I think that we can do out there, it really helps hold people accountable. The Public Disclosure Commission gives them something to do. The staff there, it's not they don't have anything to do, but they might as well do this and see if we can hold some of these people just a little bit accountable, and they know we're watching. And you never know what gets exposed in that process. I did 2 videos today. One of them will be about the partisan affiliation on the outside of the envelope, what it is, how it got there, and all that. We can talk about it today, too, if you want, but I just did a quick video because I had a lot of people have been asking me questions about it. I don't know when that one will launch exactly, but probably in a couple days. The other one I did, it was a more of an overview of kind of the tactical retreat that the Democrats are taking with the 3 of the 6 initiatives so far, where they're kind of backpedaling and they're deciding to have hearings and probably a floor vote. I would anticipate that 3 of those initiatives become law in a week or so, which is a big deal. And anybody who's paid attention to this whole process, I went into a little bit more detail of the significance and what that represents and what the Democrats are trying to do, or at least their kind of tactical strategic plan for why they're doing that right now. How passage of those initiatives is actually a pretty big success, and kind of just what it means for those of us moving forward. And I'm trying to go from their perspective. So, and I think it's important to do that so that you're able to get a better and more accurate assessment, as accurate as you can get anyway, as to the thought process and how it really is a tactical retreat, regardless of how they're going to try to spin it in the media. So that's a big deal. If this is Tuesday when I'm recording this video, hopefully some of you signed in. Last time I checked, there were about 4,000-ish people who had signed in favor of the 3 initiatives. That one hearing was today in the committee. The other 2 are tomorrow, Wednesday. If I get a chance, I'm going to run by the Capitol and hopefully get a picture of people who will be there during the hearing testifying. If I can do that, that'll be great. I've been wanting to get an in-person. I'm not planning to testify there, but I'd like to get some photos of people who are, and I think it's worthwhile to do that. So I'm hoping that that ends up producing the results that I'm anticipating right now. Hope really isn't so much part of it. I think it's inevitable right now. At least the sources on the Democrat side indicate that those 3 initiatives, police pursuit, parental transparency, and no income tax, probably those are going to become law here in a couple weeks, which is a big testament to and a success for the Let's Go Washington crew and Brian Haywood and all that. I am attempting to schedule an interview with Brian Haywood. I've done, if you look on my channel, you'll see I've done some interviews with him in 2022, kind of when he was new. And there was that 11 initiative effort that we tried then. And then also I did some last summer in the beginning stages of the 6 initiatives that he launched last year. It was right around that Freedom Fest event that he held at his barn. And so I was able to actually do an interview up there in person. I'd like to do another one. I think Brian Haywood's rapidly becoming one of the most consequential people in Washington State when it comes to impacting the conservative movement, or at least attempting to fix what's broken, which is a great tagline for Let's Go Washington. And I think it's important to try to just get some unfiltered sort of interviews of him so that people can get a sense of his perspective, what he'd like to do, what he's trying to do, what he has done. And I think that's a benefit for those of us who care about liberty and freedom in the state, so we can actually hear it from the guy who's out there involved and risking his own money and taking these chances to get these things out here on the ballot. So just again, a quick reminder, if you're going to try to ask a question in the comment section here, please make sure you use the @WeTheGovern. That way I can kind of see that question is there. I will do my best to get to those. Let me get to a couple questions to start out with and see if I'm able to answer these questions, at least do the best that I can here. Jack Pudler, you got the first question here. Could you comment on the FFL bill that's on the floor tonight? I'm assuming that this is the one that got modified. There was and this is an anti-Second Amendment bill, but it's a little, if I'm correct on which one it is, because I don't know that I am, but if I am correct on it, I think this is the one that was going to put restrictions, just put a lot of extra burdens on people who run an FFL, federal firearms license, and be able to sell firearms. And it's been one of the attacks that the kind of pro-crime crew on the Democrat side has been focused on, is making it difficult for people to legally own or purchase or access firearms. And so this one, if I remember right, was the one that required him originally to keep 5 years worth of video and all kinds of other very expensive sort of issues that for mom and pop type stores, which a lot of FFL people are, it was a pretty big burden. What I know had happened is that a lot of that stuff got negotiated down and changed before this final version. So I'm assuming the final version has been watered down quite a bit. And it's still a bad bill, but it was not as bad as it originally had come out as the first draft. So we'll see how it happens, or we'll see what happens with it. Cristiano, you got a question here. The Federal Way's chief of police sent a letter to Inslee asking him to reconsider the law on car pursuit. Do you know the latest update on this? Well, I mean, this is an interesting question because I think I've met the Federal Way chief of police before. If I'm wrong, then I'll retract that, but I think I have. I've met a lot of chiefs of police around the state, but and it's become very, the stupidity of the changes that the legislature had a number of years ago, the pro-crime crew, which is just the Democrats' obsession with making it easier for criminals to commit crimes and get away with them, seems to have no bottom to it. This was one of the more ignorant and stupid things to do, which was making it so that the police couldn't chase criminals at all. And the argument, of course, at the time was, these high-speed police pursuits, can sometimes result in fatalities during the chase, and that's true. You want to give the local police department some level of discretion on whether or not they're going to chase people in a police pursuit situation. And you want to do that because they can make their own judgments on when they need to chase or not. And most law enforcement offices had set up a pretty reasonable policy associated with how they would chase or not. If you eliminate the ability to chase, or essentially eliminate it, then you've simply made it so that criminals will always run, and there's no percentage of them ever stopping, and they're always going to cause great harm and mayhem and destruction, and and it increases stolen cars. I mean, there's all kinds of other things that have been a problem. But again, remember, we've got this initiative that's likely to pass that to some extent eliminates the restrictions that Inslee and the Democrats still had on that idea. Jason, you've got a question here, Jason Fisher. When will Nikki Haley drop out? Is she counting on the Republican bigwigs removing Trump? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have an inside scoop on Nikki Haley's political campaign. Obviously, the way things are going right now, it doesn't look like she has much of a chance. Maybe she's trying to leverage. A lot of people, I think, this is true actually on the Democrat side too. Don't think it's not like a uniquely Republican characteristic here, but people will run for president or, frankly, other high-profile political positions, governor, state senator, or even congressman or something like that. They'll run for the attention that it gives them, and it has nothing to do with whether or not they have a chance of prevailing in that election process. I mean, I've been paying a lot of close attention to elections over the last 16 years in particular, but even when I was in college and I'd volunteer on political campaigns, one of the things I noticed is that there are people, and you get to know this over time, and it's especially clear if you're actually on the campaign trail volunteering or you see these people a little bit more in person, you'll start to realize there are some people that are not terribly serious in the run for office, and they can never admit that. They always have to at least give the appearance of being serious, but they aren't. They're gadflies to some extent. And they're out there for different reasons. And this is particularly true with high-profile, big-name people who maybe their name recognition was down here, and if they can run for president, sure, they lose, or they get bounced out relatively early, but it gives them a high enough profile that they can do other things. I don't know if it's book tours, better job prospects, I don't know. But there's other reasons why people will jump in and run for president. A lot of the Democrats did that in this last cycle where they had 17 of them, I think, running for president when Biden kind of came out of that scrum. And, you know, they just have other reasons. I mean, several of the Democrats got in as in positions in government afterwards. And so you can be a no-name mayor who accomplished very little in your life, like Buttigieg, and jump up and run for president, and suddenly people notice who you are, and then you can leverage that into a no-show job at the Department of Transportation, for example. So people will have different reasons. Nikki Haley, I don't know her. You know, I'm not tied into the national scene. I have no connections with her or anybody associated with the campaign, so I don't know what her reasoning might be, but she could have different reasons for doing this. Sometimes it could come down to controlling some electors at the convention. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons why you might be able to do it. It's very expensive, though, and it wastes a lot of money. So it's hard to do if you don't have any money. And but she's continuing it, and we'll see what happens. I don't think she has much of a chance of really doing much with it, but that is where it's going. Okay, Susan, this really wasn't a question here, but I'll still add it, cover it anyway. Why do the ballots want you to mark Democrat and Republican on the outside of the envelope? So I did a whole video on this. I'll launch it in a little bit, but I'll give you a little preview in my response right now, and hopefully the preview is not too repetitious with the video that I'll launch in a couple days. They only do this once every 4 years, and they've only done this in our state now for 2 presidential primaries. It's only during the presidential primary that they do it. This year and then the 2020 presidential primary. And they have a partisan affiliation marking on the outside of the envelope that you can clearly see. So it's not a concealed one. It's out in the open. The reason why they did it, the same reason why we have the actual party nomination process is more from a caucus standpoint. Now, the Democrats like having the primary, or how we vote in the primary is what determines it. But so we've got this double process going on where the Republicans have caucuses as well as the primary. But the real reason for doing these primary votes, and again, only partisan primary, Republican, Democrat, 2 parties. And it's the same ballot. They're both there, Democrat on one side, Republican on the other. And the parties want these primaries because we've had a very low identification in Washington State for a long time. This goes back many, many years, back to the 1930s, where Washingtonians tend to not want to have party affiliation clearly out there. They tend to want to have the option, much more independence here, much more tendency to switch between parties or vote in multiple parties historically. So when I say that, you would vote for a Democrat in one position and 2 Republicans up here and then a Democrat over here. That kind of voting is more common in our state than in most states. You really don't have a lot of straight ticket party voting, not as much in Washington as you do in other states. And the failure, the lack of registration by party was very popular here, especially when we had the blanket primary system back from the 30s until about 2003. And so it was only recently with the top two primary kind of influenced this. The Supreme Court ruling that said the blanket primary is illegal, and all of that has kind of led to this weird sort of dynamic that we have right now, where we have these this vote, and I don't want to get into all the details on it. There's a couple of people that I've linked to them in my video and the stories, and they've detailed it out here. But essentially, what you have here is the parties run these primary votes, primary elections, both of them, so they can have clear definition, at least of some percentage of the population that's clearly affiliated with one of their parties or the other. This idea to make it clearly where you have to mark it on the outside of the ballot is pointless, other than what it does is it makes it so that theoretically the Secretary of State will tell you that they like the ability to sort it. They get it in, they say, okay, Republican voters over there, Democrat voters over there, because essentially they're voting in two different primaries. But the reality is, the way the system works, you can run the ballots through. The ballots will automatically be sorted based on which primary you vote in. The only problem you're going to have is if somebody tries to vote in both of them, which is a common issue that happens during a presidential partisan primary. And when that happens, then that ballot gets kicked out and probably doesn't really get counted at that point in time. So you have to vote in one or the other. That's the point. That's the whole point. They don't have to make it so that it's public. That was a foolish and Democrat-driven agenda when they originally did it. The Republicans have tried to change it a couple times in the legislature. They don't have the votes to make that change. And the main reason is that people don't want this open and clear party affiliation on the outside of the ballot. It doesn't have that big of an impact on things. You only do it once a year and only on the presidential or once every 4 years and only on the presidential primary. They don't do that on the general election in November. They don't do that on the primary election in August. They don't do it on the special elections that we just had in February or in April. They don't do it on those ballots. It's only this one, the presidential primary, once every 4 years. So there's a lot of other things you can worry about that are a lot more important than this issue. This is not the most important one. But from a policy fix standpoint, if the state's still going to continue to create mailing lists for the respective party organizations, which is essentially what this is, then we want to make it so it's less obvious how people vote, then they could do several things. One is they could cover that with a privacy flap, and you wouldn't be able to tell. You could send it in, nobody would know. They go and pull out the ballot, run through the machine, and it is what it is, and they can tell how people vote there. The other option is to give somebody, so on the outside they could say that they're independent, and then on the inside they vote in one or the other. That's another option you could do too. And I guess maybe parties would even like that better, because then that shows the independent, the mystery magical independent voter self-identifying that way on the outside of the ballot. I don't know. Not the biggest thing in the world. It doesn't affect the majority of elections. It's only in this limited presidential primary, but every time it happens, there's a big hoopla about it, and everybody makes a big deal. It's a stupid thing. It should be changed. I would fix it if I had control over the policy, but that's what it is. And it isn't so much. Remember this, the Democrats voting, there's going to be a ton of Democrats this cycle that are voting the presidential primary because Biden's going to win on one side and Trump's going to win on the other. I mean, I'm sorry if that spoils the outcome for you ahead of time, but that's obviously going to be what the outcome is. And so I could see a bunch of Democrats deciding to vote in the Republican primary this time just because they want to throw off and skew the numbers that Trump would have. Or you might, on the other, you might have a number of people, Republicans who voted in the Democrat primary, which happened 4 years ago, to skew the Democrat results the same way. I mean, that goes back to 2008 when Rush Limbaugh did that with Operation Chaos in the Obama and Clinton match that year. This is not unusual, but it's not as big a deal. If you're worried about it, again, one of the things I always say is the post office has its own set of problems. I wouldn't trust the post office with much of anything anymore. So unless you really, really need to use it, I would recommend probably trying to focus on other things that are probably just a bit more important to worry about. Okay, so let's get to some of these other questions here right now. Make it easier. Yeah, I saw that. Make it easier to toss out the conservative votes. Possibly, but I don't think that's the big issue that you're going to deal with there. Jason, you got a question here. Thoughts on Joe Bidenopoulos underperforming in Michigan primary? Not a surprise. I mean, listen, you got a brain dead guy who's clearly got dementia, and everybody knows it. So, he's running for office, and it's a weird. I mean, he's barely able to function. He can't produce an extemporaneous sort of conversation for any length of time. It's scary as heck that guy has any kind of access to any military decisions of any kind at all. But he's surrounded by a bunch of people who probably like having somebody in there who's fairly worthless so that they can control and manipulate him. Don't think that that's not how a lot of the bureaucrats and the bureaucracy and the special interests that surround politics love having really stupid, incompetent, or dumb people in political office because they're easier to control. That's how it works. They love that, actually. So there's a strong incentive for bureaucracy to promote those type of people to be in these political positions. This is actually not, there's nothing new about it. And so when they do that, it increases the power of the bureaucrats, and it waters down the power of the politicians. So bureaucrats love it, special interests love it, because now it's easier to influence these guys. They're too dumb to write their own bills, right? They're not knowledgeable enough about policy. You walk them into the caucus means the legislature, we're voting yes on this and no on this, and if you don't do that, we're going to eliminate campaign services from the Democrat Party from you, right? All kinds of stuff like that. These things happen. So they like dumb people and brain dead people in political office, which is why when you meet some of these politicians, not all of them, right, but some of them, you wonder, how the heck did they ever get in there? This guy's clearly incompetent or incapable of functioning in real life, but they like it. So Biden's just that guy. I mean, he's like the poster child of that type of person. So that's how him not doing that well in Michigan doesn't surprise me, but there's not a high level of, a lot of people don't like him. Okay, let's look at some of these other questions here. Scenario. Give me a reason to not move out of state. South Dakota has a 4.2% sales tax and no state income tax, no personal property tax. Cost of living is way lower in the South and the Midwest. Okay, yeah, this is a great question, Scenario. And this is, you can move. I mean, it won't make much difference in the long run because, unfortunately, with the policies that we see, bad policies that come from whatever state they originate, they spread like a disease. South Dakota's got its own set of problems, and you're going to be experiencing it that when you get out there. Beyond the weather issues, the extreme weather. I have friends that live in South Dakota, so I'm pretty familiar with it. Sure, you have some benefits out there. You don't have income tax here. You do have property tax here. So South Dakota temporarily for now is certainly better in those areas. But move out there, see what you think. I just don't believe you're going to get away from what you think you're getting away from. And this is what I'm being told by friends of mine who've moved to Texas and Florida and, Omaha, out of Wyoming, and discovering that the homeless camp was moved into the nearest hotel there that he didn't realize. Here he thought he got away from it, and it's right down the street. Crime problems in Texas they didn't expect to see, the same types of issues in Florida. Listen, I like the policies that they implement there. We want states to be their laboratories of good policies so that we can bring them into states like other states like Washington, where we need to fix a lot of things that are broken here. But again, I don't think you're going to be able to run away from this. And people will try, and I don't think it's going to work. We're already seeing problems in Idaho. You're going to go out there and discover that the Republicans that are elected office out there have zero idea about what's actually coming. They look at what's happened in Washington or California or Oregon, and they see it as some kind of abstract, distant problem that's never going to hit them. And they don't realize that the very people they're hiring in government to run the bureaucracy, people that are running as Republicans, are actually bringing in just as many stupid, bad ideas from other states. They camouflage it so it doesn't look like it's as bad, but I see them trying to do the same thing in Idaho and Montana and other places. What you find is once somebody's gone through some of the drama that we've gone through in our state and we can push it back, that we're more likely to make things better and stick to it because we're aware of what the problems are. But you can see for yourself what you're going to be dealing with if you want to go out there. So let's see. Roger Smith, you mentioned something about the Washington gun law. a video on the subject earlier, and I'm sure you're referring to the FFL bill that's on the floor tonight. And I would recommend anybody go to Washington Gun Law and look at their videos. He's done a great job there talking about some of those specific issues. In fact, I'll go there and look at that video myself as well. Grayman 6734. How much faith do you have in the integrity of our state elections? Well, this is funny because of all things, I'm like, one thing that I get threatened litigation against me, most commonly, at least in the last 4 years, has been all the work that I've tried to do on like voter roll integrity or voter roll cleanup or anything like that. The previous 5-6 years when I was doing stuff related to this issue, nobody cared. No, Republicans didn't care, Democrats didn't care, nobody really cared. And it was actually very hard to find people to actually help and work with me. Now, after the 2020 elections, and really starting a little bit before then, I finally started to get experts or people who cared and were starting to become more involved and engaged on it. There's a problem with our election process. There is. But there are problems that we can fix. They're certainly fixable. And it just takes a lot of work, and we're just going to have to keep grinding away on it. It doesn't... people look for some kind of like secret sauce, Hosanna miracle cure that's going to land on their head and it's all bluebird butterflies and sunshine from then on. It's not going to be that way. It's going to be a long slog to clean up the stupid voter rolls problem. It's going to be a longer slog to fix and address the mail-in voting, lack of chain of custody, lack of transparency associated with that. But the two of those issues probably link together quite a bit. Machine counting and other things are relatively easy to address and fix, but voter roll cleanup and the obstacles that have been placed in our way to ensure integrity in the voter rolls, as well as transparency with everything from what happens to all the extra ballots that they send out, like confetti, what happens to all the people who are not U.S. citizens that are registered to vote, which happens by the tens of thousands in Washington state. How many of them actually vote? Most of them that come to me that are registered to vote don't vote, but they're coming to me already. So, and I've run into plenty of people from New Zealand and Australia and England and China who are here legally. They're here on a green card or H-1B visa or something, and they're getting registered to vote even when they tell the Department of Licensing they don't want to register to vote. So what does that tell you? So I've got a lot of concerns about it. I do know, though, that you have to participate. There's a bunch of elections just recently in 2023 where in Ocean Shores, for example, great city councilwoman. We flipped the mayor there with a good guy. We had a good city councilwoman who also would have been in the same reform sort of attitude. She lost by 1 vote. And you can't tell me that there weren't at least as many people in that city right now who said, oh, my vote doesn't count, and they didn't send it in, and they would have voted for her. And they didn't. They didn't bother to. And I think that happens probably a lot more than people realize. So do I have faith in the integrity of our state elections? I think that you can make a difference. I think if you're really, really close, it's risky. I think you need to get, the larger difference between you and the other side that you can get, the better off you are. There's corruption and cheating that goes on everywhere. It always has. Anybody that thinks there's some kind of nirvana moment in the history of America where we didn't have election cheating is shockingly ignorant of history. But it's one of those things where we just have to start working on the fixes and need to have a rational approach for how we're going to try to fix it. And it's not easy, and nor is it as simple. Okay, so I don't know if that really helped answer any questions there, or if you feel like it answered any questions. But I've got a lot of concerns with the election process, but it's a perpetual grind. It won't be there won't be one simple solution. Anybody that tells you that there's a simple solution hasn't done their homework or paid any attention to what these issues are. People cheat with in-person voting. People always have. So that by itself isn't the solution. It's really more of a combination of photo ID. I think in-person voting is a big improvement, and voter roll cleanup. If you can do all those things and be able to create a system that allows you to do that, we'll be in much better shape. Difference made at We the Govern. Any thoughts on productive ways we can politely hold up a mirror to folks in the state and help them see that the stories being told by the state party are hurting Washington? Okay. State party, I'm assuming when you say state party, are you talking about Republicans or Democrats? Because both of them But Democrats tell probably the bigger amount of stories, and since the Democrats actually control the mechanisms of power for the most part, probably their stories are the most harmful. But if Republicans are telling self-destructive or dishonest stories, I wouldn't mind, exposing those too. It's all the same. I think you do better if you share the truth, or if at least you're able to face the truth with the issues that you're dealing with. The Rodamon voting in the state is a waste of time. The results are announced before the ballots are in. Yeah, I mean, listen, here's the thing. That's just shockingly ignorant on its face. And I'm sorry, because it's just, I'm not trying to attack you. It's just that you don't know how the voting system unfortunately works. I'm not saying it's good, and I'm just saying the way it works. There's math models that you're going to be able to get based on how many ballots you have that come in a certain period of time. They count the ballots that are there that evening when they make their first announcements that Tuesday at 8 p.m. Typically, the count that they've got there with the ballots that are hanging out, which is another ridiculous element to how we vote in a state that makes it a voting month instead of a voting day, is ridiculous, and it's bad. Votes trend one direction, sometimes they trend the other. It used to be they trend more Republican. Sometimes they still do in some jurisdictions. Sometimes the late coming in votes trend the other way, but they don't tend to trend more than a certain percentage. So anything that has a massive gap of 40% or 20% when those ballots are first turned in, yeah, you'd be an idiot to think that the other person's going to win. They aren't. Maybe in a jurisdiction of like 100 people and something small going on, but if it's any decent sized ballot, that's why they're announcing those results. I would change the policy. I think that if you're going to have, I don't like mail-in voting, but if you're going to have it, then they have to all be in hand on election night when they count it, and that's it. They're done. There's no more coming in after that. Some states that do mail-in voting have that rule, and that's a better rule than what we have right now. But voting is better than not voting. It's a pathetically insignificant amount of time that you spend voting, the average person. It's the least amount of stuff that you should be able to do to be engaged and involved in the political process. And it's many, many times, I can't tell you, people like that who say voting's a waste of time are the exact people who have actually caused us to lose a lot of elections. You're not going to win a disproportionate election down Seattle. The Republicans are not going to jump into the 43rd legislative district and win it. They won't. They can cause mayhem on the Democrat side sometimes, and that's kind of fun. But you can't win it that way. But in a lot of these elections, like the 10th up in Island County, you easily had just a handful of people if they had voted, and you can actually kind of get a pretty good sense of who they are. If they had voted, that would have been a different outcome. Same within the 47th, which is in Kent. Same within the 30th, which is in Federal Way. Same within the 24th, which is out on the peninsula. We've seen where small numbers of people who decide to stay home make a big difference in the outcome. So it would be nice if people would, of course, you always want your people to vote, and you don't want the other side to vote. That's how it goes. Sydney, there's a question here. On that note, why does the Democrat side of the ballot have an uncommitted delegates section plus a write-in? Can you explain that, please? Yeah, those are the rules. They're different, actually, on the Democrat primary than they are on the Republican side. Uncommitted delegates is a category that, and remember, the primary really counts for the Democrat Party more than it does for the Republican Party. For the Republican Party, it's just a mailing list that they can reach out. And, of course, a good press release, depending on if you're the guy that won or you had a result that was better than you were expecting. Because the Republicans are still choosing through the caucus process who their actual delegates are. They're going to go to the national convention and actually approve or vote for the president at that point in time. The Democrats, however, are doing it strictly through the primary, the vote itself. And so they have a write-in section there for that reason, to write a Mickey Mouse or whoever they want to. And then they have this uncommitted delegates idea, which is, I've not seen that so much in the past. So that clearly is an anti-Biden vote that Democrats will be able to do that. Anyway, so that's how that's why they have that. It's kind of odd, I know. Edward Markian, do you think we can vote our way out of this? Oh, great question. People ask this all the time. In fact, I remember the first time somebody mentioned this to me was like 40, 50 years ago when I was a kid at college, 40 years ago when I was in college. A little less than that, I guess now. I'm not quite that old. But in the early 90s, the first time somebody asked this question. because the argument at the time, I was a big, I still am, but I was a big Second Amendment activist in the early 90s in particular. I came back home to be an intern at the Second Amendment Foundation. I helped organize a gun rights policy conference in Philadelphia. And, we were looking at this bad trend on Second Amendment issues back then and believing that we were on this death spiral of Second Amendment protections. And we really felt, because Reagan had signed the assault weapons ban in '86, the Brady Bill was being pushed at that time. All these other challenges to the Second Amendment were being pushed in a lot of jurisdictions. People forget it because you might be too young, or you may not have been aware of what was going on at the time, but there were some issues there. And so it didn't look good, because we were doing these surveys that were showing younger people were less interested in firearms. And what's interesting now, the difference between then and now, is there's actually a higher rate of firearm ownership among younger people today than there was back then. There also was an interesting movement that had started that I remember thinking at the time was a waste of time, and I was wrong. And it really was this strong focus on helping teach people how to shoot. And I did this personally. I would go out and bring a lot of people out to the range. I was single at the time, so if I went on a date, one of the dates I remember having sometimes was taking girls going to the range and shooting for the first time. It was something cool to do, something different than what they would probably normally do. And there was this emphasis on teaching new people who've never shot a firearm before, teaching them how to shoot. And I think that was really good. But there was also this prepare for the apocalypse, end of the world kind of demeanor that would go in the same stream, hand in hand. And so those people were always saying back then that we won't survive the year, won't survive the decade. It's the end. It's all the end's coming soon. And I don't know how many times people have to say that, and for it not to happen, for people to at least question a little bit more about it. What's the best path forward? I've read so many stories, contemporaneous stories of people many times in history who felt that they were at the end, and this was the end of the world. It's never going to be the end. The question is, it might be the end for somebody specifically, but it's not the end overall. So the question is, do you vote your way out of it? And usually the reason why people ask this question is they say, well, no, we're going to have to fight a civil war. We're going to have to get violent, or something. That's usually what that means. Voting's not enough. And I think that people misunderstand when you say vote. Voting for office is like this little teeny microscopic piece of what you do. It should be 1/100th of your involvement. If that's all you do, then you're at the bare subpar minimum amount of being involved. The question is, can you influence and change the way people think or view the world around you? And you do that with your own ability to personally influence people that you know or you come into contact with. And the more you can do that, the more you can shift the bar in a different direction, the more you're likely it is that you can make sure there is an electoral outcome that you want. I'm fully aware of the threats that socialism represents and the historical trend of socialism all around the world. I'm just as familiar as anybody else. But most of the people who ask questions like this are the people who do nothing. They're people who never do anything. So they're always talkers and never do anything. And so they like attacking people who actually do things. I don't know why, but it makes them feel good, I guess. And the reality is that if you want to make an impact, you got to go out there and do stuff to make a difference. Find some way that fits your abilities and skill set and a cause that you care about, and you stay focused on influencing the way people around you or in other communities, depending on your skill and ability to reach people, that you can influence them and how they view that issue. And over time, if you're really skilled at maybe you are a good person to run for office. Most people aren't, but some people are. Maybe you can study up and get in there and make a difference in just your small piece, right, for the school board or the city council. Even in countries that I'm just looking recently in Argentina, which is kind of a silly thing. I would never expect any example of any kind of governance to come out of Argentina. And this crazy guy gets elected there. You can't tell me that people didn't want to influence or manipulate that election outcome. There is no way that guy getting in there was the person that the establishment wanted to see. This is particularly true with his complete change in doing things like, if you've noticed, probably not because the American media is not going to cover this, but eliminating rent control, and then suddenly, miraculously, the price of rents dropped everywhere and the inventory for rents radically increased. Exactly as it has every single time rent control's ever been removed since it was first tried in America back in the 1920s. Every time they try it, it fails, and then they get rid of it, and then life gets better. They just did it in Argentina in the last 9 weeks. It's amazing what happened there. Same thing that they did as well in Argentina of taking a U.S.-sized deficit for the size of their country and taking their deficit and turning it into a surplus in 9 weeks. I would never in a million years have expected, of all places, Argentina, for anybody to come in and make that kind of a change. And how did he do it? He radically downsized and fired as many people out of government as he thought he could get away with in a very short period of time. Right away, hit hard, hit fast, and you will start to influence and make a difference in that community. It can be done here too. Look at El Salvador, of all places. Now, listen, it probably wasn't constitutional, but this guy comes in and he decides, it's the least safe country in the world, poor country, and they decide just to jail all their gang members and face tattoo people and throw them in jail, and then suddenly it becomes the safest country overnight. And it wasn't because he did a police state. He just simply arrested the bad guys and put them in prison, something that we've known about in this country, at least since James Q. Wilson started writing about crime stats and studies long ago in the 20s and 30s, which, of course, by the 60s and 70s, some of his writings were becoming more popular. That led to Giuliani demonstrating it in person in more recent times in the early 90s in New York City. You can make changes and impact in different ways. There'll always be people who want to just go down and bury themselves in a hole and presume that the end of the world's coming and that they're going to, do nothing. So you just don't matter. You just pull yourself out of the mix. Most of those people are probably people that would agree with me on a lot of this stuff. I'd rather them not abandon the world, and I'd rather them be involved. But if they're not going to be involved, they aren't showing up, so they don't matter. So it'd be nice to have more people engaged and involved in an intelligent and effective way. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean you have instant solutions. It's not, heaven on earth tomorrow. Remember, one of the risks, I think, and this is something that, at least from my opinion, that I always try to explain to people, and it's a failing of the socialism, right? If you read Karl Marx, and I think people who care about liberty and freedom you should read Karl Marx. You should understand the Communist Manifesto. You should understand the writings that lead to what's probably one of the most destructive political ideologies in modern human history. That has just killed millions and millions and tens of millions of people around the world as a natural result. And yet socialism continuously is regurgitated and tried again because this time it'll be different. And one of the biggest failings of socialism, just a fundamental failing, is this total unwillingness to understand the nature of man. Marx clearly demonstrated ignorance about the nature of man that's very hard to dispute. He thought that man was perfectible, that you could perfect man, and that man was could be made more perfect, right? And that the desire of man was to be more perfect. But the nature of man, clearly, and this is, again, you're going to go back to more of a Christian perspective on this too, is that the nature of man has not changed. It hasn't changed in millennia, and it won't change in the future anytime soon. So the nature of man is not perfectible in that sense. Man is always going to be jealous, and it's always going to have envy, and it's always going to have psychopaths who will be involved, and you always have these problems and challenges. Just like man can also love and sacrifice and support their neighbor, there's these many different characteristics that are just in the nature of man and different people. And so the wisdom of the founding fathers, at least when they were trying to create this country, was this idea that they had checks and balances. They weren't idiots. They were familiar with the failings of man throughout history and different forms of government that had been experimented with. And so they came up with this system that they thought would integrate these checks and balances to restrain this inevitable, predictable, sure as the sun rising tomorrow nature of man. Marx disagreed with that, right? Marx believed that you could create this utopia on earth, and that's essentially what allows socialists, communists, every flavor of the collectivism that tends to come out of this world. This is what allows them to do unspeakable, horrible, destructive things, because they're looking for a paradise on earth as part of their political process, and it's not going to happen. It only gets worse. But if you're striving for paradise in this life, then you're willing to destroy and do anything, right? The ends justify the means. You'll do anything you can to get there, and it's never going to succeed. So anyway, sorry, man, I really went off topic there. Tony, yes, you mentioned something about party affiliation. I already talked about it, and I got a new video coming out on that. Ryan, I've heard various counties throughout the nation are implementing in-person single-day voting, sidestep their state mail-in balloting system. Any chance a county here could? Not under our current system. And I like the in-person single-day voting. I like the idea of making voting a holiday. I also like the idea of eliminating special elections and putting them all on November. So you don't have these special school board special elections or other things. Just put it all in November, and that's going to be your voting day. And yeah, I'd consider it, but I don't think the way state law works would allow you to do that in our state yet. But I love the idea, and I think lobbying for that is a good thing. John, I do not like the mark the ballot on the outside at all. I know, I don't like it either. I will go one step further and say all parties should be allowed in the primary and privacy. Should be allowed in the primary. All parties should be allowed in the primary and privacy on the outside of the envelope. Well, for clarity's sake, with the top two primary system, all parties are allowed in the primary. But the reality is that it's pretty rare that you'll get somebody who isn't one of, or at least isn't affiliated with one of the top two political parties to make it through the primary. That's the problem with the jungle primary system. Or if you like third parties, that's what makes the jungle primary system kind of death on third parties. Presidential primary is the only exception. When you see your presidential ballot in November, you're going to see a libertarian candidate, all different kinds of party candidates, minor party candidates there, and then you'll see the two Republican and Democrat parties. It's very hard in the top two primary system for a third party candidate to win an election there. Listen, I had a friend of mine who was a college Republican with me when I was at Columbia, and he ran as the first libertarian in Connecticut to ever get elected, I think, to office out there. I think he was still in college at the time when he did it. It was hilarious. The Republicans had a loser in office. They aced him out, wouldn't let him participate in the primary they had there, so he ran as a libertarian and got elected and beat the Republican and the Democrat in that district. It was very funny. It was always one of those enjoyable personal experiences to witness where you actually know the people involved. That doesn't really happen very often. It's pretty rare. And I do think that they can fix this exterior ballot marking. But remember, this is a Republican concern at this point in time, not a Democrat concern. And so the Democrats are unwilling to fix stuff that are Republican concerns at this point in time. So it's not the worst issue out there right now, but it's definitely one that I think that that you should be aware of, but it's not the biggest issue. Difference made, okay. Yes, the Democrat Party, I'm assuming you're referring to the previous question that you had up there, which was basically the question you had was about communicating the stories being told by the state party how they're hurting Washington. We need to do a better job communicating. Don't presume that the media is never going to help you. So no traditional media, whatever's left of them. I know most of them are going bankrupt and they're folding faster than anything out there, but you have to develop your own methods of communicating. Even if it's old school print flyers and lit drop them in your community, it's still better than what you're going to get there. Let's see. Jason got a question here. If the ballot measures pass, will Sideshow Bob push to overturn them at the Seattle Supreme Court? And that's a great question. This is one that comes up periodically. Keep in mind, at this point in time, the way it looks is that we're going to be almost 50% there in a couple weeks, where 3 of them are going to just flat out become law. Now, the legislature will pass them, and that's what it looks like. Now, the other 3 will most likely be on the ballot in November. Once they pass, the question is then what challenge can they have to these initiatives after that? I'm sure that they'll be challenged because each of those 3 initiatives take away money from the grifter class, the Democrats and their basically special interests. And so they're funding a lot of their friends who are kicking campaign contributions back to them with that money, very specifically with that money, especially the carbon tax scam stuff, the gas tax, the kind of hidden gas tax thing. So that's a big chunk of money for them. So they're not going to go down without a fight. They'll have some kind of fight on it. There was some thought process put into these initiatives. I'm familiar with some of the attorneys that reviewed it and were involved in analyzing this from that exact perspective. But their involvement in the process gives me some confidence that we'll have a little bit harder time overturning it at the Seattle Supreme Court. And remember this, I realize it doesn't look this way from the outside, but the Supreme Court is corrupt, and most of the Supreme Court justices are horrible people, and they're terrible. But They do sometimes, occasionally understand English, and they'll occasionally not be completely corrupt. And they still have a sense. If you've ever met any of them and talked to them or been in small forums with them, which I've been a few times, you can see this fear that they have that the public is going to understand and that just how bad they really are. And so they still have this, as much as it doesn't appear that way sometimes, they still don't want to be completely exposed as the complete corrupt court. So they're going to have a hard time if these pass in November, which I think they will. They're going to have a lot harder time throwing them out than they did when it was just Tim Eyman alone trying to fight by himself. And it's just that's the way it is. What is the status of the remount control bill? And I look down below. This is from Michael. This is a question from Michael here. So I'm assuming what you're saying is what's the status of the essentially the rent control bill that it has gone through. And this is the 7% rent stabilization. That's right, they call it rent stabilization. Again, just a clown bill for people who are shockingly ignorant of history and math and human nature and everything else. The corrupt people who push rent control, they know that it won't work, but they don't care. That one went through one house. It's still in the Senate. I'm not sure if it came out of the Senate exactly. I should go back and look. I did something about it last week on one of my videos, and I'll go back and look at it. But rent control fails every time. Every time it's tried. It's a stupid idea. It will not help. So anyway, it's just it's a terrible idea. So I'm hoping that it goes away. But anyway, we'll see. So I don't know exactly. Jason, what bill will they try to sneak through when people are not looking? Not as many this year as normal. I think the initiatives have really thrown off all of their strategy. There were a lot of really bad bills that died, a lot more even than normal that died in legislative session. The majority of all the crazy bills we were talking about 2 months ago are gone. They didn't make it through. Some of them just didn't make it through because the Republicans, unusually so, seem to be actually fairly capable of playing the the game that exists in the legislature, and they found ways of killing them. Some of them just because of public exposure, some of them because of time, some of them because of infighting on the Democrat side. Always watch the money. It's the budget bill that's the most significant one. Pay attention to what they're funding and where the money goes. That bill is the most important and primary bill that the legislature passes. And that's where most damage is done, whether people are aware of it or not. It's how the money gets distributed and divvied up amongst their friends. So that's definitely one of the issues there. Let's see. I was going to look at, the rent control bill is dead, Miss Jennifer. Thank you. But I'm not 100. There were two of them, and one of them's definitely dead. The second one, I'm not totally sure. Let's look at this here. We had the himself. If I run for office, will you be the financial oversight to a campaign finance that I'd be forced to use? No, I won't be, but I'll definitely refer you to the handful of good treasurers that exist in the state who can keep you on the straight and narrow. The campaign finance laws are a little ridiculous in our state generally, and so just because I'm helping enforce them rigorously, it isn't because I think they're all awesome. It's just because I can do it and nobody else will, or at least very few other people will, and I'm happy to train more people to do it if you want to do that with me. But the reality is that you're better off just use a treasurer, really better than I am. I'm good at finding complaints. I'm not good at managing a monthly reporting or a 7-day, 28-day reporting window for a political campaign. And you really need to have a good treasurer. They aren't that expensive. They're worth having if you're running a serious campaign, and you don't want to try to do that on your own, at least not the first time out. There's a question here from Jason. Do you see the crime situation improving in Seattle? Do the voters care anymore? Jason Rant said they probably only have over 500 police officers. Yeah. So here's the thing about Seattle. Seattle, again, is you will have jurisdictions that choose to self-immolate, even if the rest of the state doesn't want to go down the same yellow brick road to insanity. Seattle's one of those, one of the worst examples that we have in our state. Portland and next door, San Francisco down in California, for example, in LA, in California, you have Chicago and New York, you have Detroit and Michigan. These Baltimore and Maryland, right? You have these cities that decide they want to destroy their community and themselves. And Seattle does seem determined to go down that road. Now, it's not gone so far that it couldn't come back. You can actually fix things really quickly. Nobody living in Washington State today, most likely, I doubt anybody watching this video, really truly experiences or has any idea what real crime is like. I lived in Manhattan and New York City in the pre-Giuliani days when it was under Dinkins, when they had 2,200 people murdered within 10 miles of my dorm room in 1 year, and that wasn't even that big of a deal to them. I mean, crime was so bad, you can't even fathom how bad it can get. The thing is, it had built up there over years, same stupid policies that they're trying to implement now. This is well-known, well-tread ground. Everyone knows this, that if you don't identify criminals and put them away, not a surprise, you release them back out on the streets, whether that's cashless bail or whatever idiotic idea that you come up with, you're going to have more crime. Seattle's just proving that once again, but it's been proven time and time and time again. It requires a new group of exceptionally ignorant people to come out of college in social studies and social sciences and then jump back in and think they've rediscovered something new. And so they implement the same stupid, dumb policies that failed last time, and they're doing it again. Historically, that doesn't always work too well for them because typically that results in a political backlash, which is happening in Seattle and Washington State in general. Seattle's going to be in tough times because it's going to be hard to build up that police department. Voters do care. And if you don't care, then go ahead and live in Seattle and see what happens to you. You will become a victim of crime. And eventually that seems to be what a lot of these Democrats need to be, is they need to be victimized by criminals. And then eventually maybe they decide that's not so cool anymore. The surrounding jurisdictions aren't always filled to the same percentage with the same crazies. And so although the crime in Seattle won't stay there, it'll spread like a disease to the surrounding communities. As those communities end up cracking down, right, and deciding that they don't want to self-immolate the same way Seattle is, inevitably that does start to lead to some kind of reform or change. But it's going to be tough. Seattle's tough. Somebody was talking about moving to another state. I mean, the more significant thing you could do is move so that you're not in the middle of an urban center. If you live in an urban center, I'd encourage you to move outside of that urban center one way or the other. And that's something I would do if I were you. Let's see. The German ideology by Marx gives an even better description of communism's shortcomings. Perhaps. I mean, the funny thing is there's tons of flavors of communism, socialism, of collectivism in general, tons of flavors. And Ayn Rand was an interesting writer when her critique of socialism or collectivism in general was probably one of the best things that she ever wrote in all of her various writings. I disagreed with her in some things, but I really thought her critique of socialism and communism in general, just collectivism as she called it, was highly effective and really understandable. If you read that and you're literate, which might mean that you couldn't have gone through Common Core, but if you're still literate and you read it and think about what she's written, I think it would be very hard for you to do that and then still come back and be a socialist at the end of the day. Edward got a question here. Speaking on making a difference, could you tell Semi Bird to fix his campaign? I've been trying to volunteer, but it's very disorganized, and I get phone calls from all sorts of people. I mean, listen, I've given advice to people on how to fix political campaigns. I don't think I've stepped in and given Semi Bernie advice, but when you say fix his campaign, I'm assuming you got one of two things. The only thing I would ever give advice on probably is just filing your PDCs and how to avoid getting in trouble with violating the campaign finance laws, since I'm fairly familiar with that. After that, running a statewide campaign, it's hard if you don't have money. It just is. There's no way to avoid that. If you got to raise money in order to be able to fund. And you have to spend it well in order to fund a statewide campaign. And you can't fund a statewide campaign in this. Even guerrilla campaigns, living off the land, even doing that, you cannot do it with less than a couple $1 million. You really can't. You can run for smaller offices, the insurance commissioner or the treasurer sometimes, where there's not as much attention on it, and probably get away with having a much smaller political campaign. But if you're going to run for governor or state, federal senator or something like that, that's a whole statewide campaign. Millions of dollars is what it takes. It just does. You can't even hire anybody, and you can't run any kind of an advertising campaign unless you do something like that. So it's hard. And if you come in as an outsider to try to help with a campaign that's underfunded, it's always going to look chaotic. Even the good campaigns look chaotic. So it's very tough. So, I mean, I can try to give people's advice, but it's easy to be the guy on the outside telling somebody else what to do. It's a lot harder to get in there and do it. So I try not to abuse my position too much. I try to help when people want help. Anybody that asks me, I'll help them. I'll give them my advice. It's not perfect, but I think it probably will help you avoid most obvious problems that I've witnessed over the years. We got a question here. Okay, this is a good question from Clay. Tacoma has signs all over about a school budget vote, but they don't have any initiative on the signs. Oh, it's just a vote. Yeah. So, by the way, signs up to 4x8 are exempt from having paid for by statements on them, just so you know. So they're one of the specific exemptions. Pins, bumper stickers, buttons, and signs up to 4x8 don't actually have to have paid for statements. Some people do it, which is great, but a lot of them don't. So that isn't necessarily a violation. And it's not a school budget. What they are is they're voted. It's a levy or a bond out there. Unfortunately, both of which passed in Tacoma. They were defeated in other places, but not in Tacoma. Brandon, you got a question. So if we keep them busy with initiatives, then they have less time to run amok. That's my theory too. The other thing is if you are running initiatives, it means you're playing offense and you're not playing defense. There's a lot of people that like playing defense and they like losing. And so they like to always be losing, playing defense. I don't quite get that mentality, but it's like a Stockholm kind of syndrome. And a lot of people have that. Franklin, MC, can we pass a law that Washington Apple Health is limited to U.S. citizens? No, you could. I don't think the Democrats would pass that right now, but you could. Ms. Jennifer, you got a question. Have you been on Undivided Brandy Cruz show? You look familiar. Yeah, I have. Brandy actually interviewed me last year. Gosh, 4 months ago or something. So yes, you'll find me there. I think she put it behind the paywall though, so I'm not sure that you might see clips that she's put out there, but she has interviewed me before. It was actually a really long interview, and probably one of the more, at least as the interviewee, it was one of the more interesting interviews I've had lately, mainly because it's from somebody who lives in Washington, is pretty familiar with the issues, and she asked me some questions that nobody's ever asked me before. So it was good. It made the interview interesting for me, and I suspect it made it interesting for other people as well. Let's see, Michael, your conversation about Argentina and El Salvador give me hope for the U.S. Yeah, well, I never would think I'd ever mention those countries in the conversation about giving anybody hope. But it's just, the world is a weird place sometimes. There's funny things. And I see somebody here saying I lived in Oakland in the 70s, high crime and lots of shootings. Yeah, and to be honest with you, as a percentage of the population, the violent crime, rape, murder, robbery, muggings, and things like that were actually higher in Washington State in the 70s and 80s, and especially in the early 90s, which is really what led, in part, not exclusively, but it was a part of the pushback against the Democrats at the time. It's one of the reasons why they lost control of the Washington State legislature and the congressional delegation from Washington, was because of this crime wave that was going on in the state. And the Democrats then, just like now, love criminals. I mean, there's no other way to look at this. I've never seen a party so closely affiliate themselves with the worst elements of humanity, like the crime, than criminals that they have. I mean, Bob Ferguson is the violent sex predator's greatest friend. There's no other way to define him. It's the primary definition of who Bob Ferguson is. It's just terrible. Let's see. Let me look down here. Follow the money, follow the rent control. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, Pamela, outro. Follow the money. Following the rent money can be life-altering in a very negative way. That is why stabilization control fails at the legislative chambers of commerce donor level. Yeah, I mean, it kind of does. But, one of the big issues here is why do they push rent control? Rent control has failed and will continue to fail in every single jurisdiction it's ever tried. I mean, you have to really be self-deceptive to think that it won't. The question, though, people can say, and I'd agree with them, right? Rent's too high. Rent's too high. So what is this driving the cost of rent? Well, one thing that does is if you jack up the price of building anything and making it almost impossible to rent, then you're going to restrict the inventory that you'd have for rent, and you increase the cost of what it costs you to actually produce that building or get that house up. And when you do that, then of course the rent's going to increase because the risk factor is higher. People have to raise the rent. But a lot of the people who are pushing this don't really care about this. They don't care at all about whether you can afford rent or whether there's any renters or whether all the landlords go bankrupt. They don't care one bit. What these advocates now who are out there, you see them openly say this in Olympia and Seattle and Spokane and anywhere else in the country lately where they've been coming out, they're just open. They don't even want you to own. They want to have control over all the buildings themselves because it's a cash grab for them. The insiders feel like they're going to make a bunch of money on this. And they make money in a variety of ways. One is if they shut down the rent and everybody's homeless, these guys are oftentimes tied into the homeless industrial complex. And so they actually make a lot of the money off of driving you into drug addiction and homelessness and helplessness. And then they can use your misery to justify bigger grant dollars for their little nonprofit scam operation that isn't going to help solve the problem. It just makes it worse, but that's how they operate. It's become so bold and open. I'm amazed anybody doesn't really talk about it more. You can't find very few honest organizations are left that exist to help the homeless. Most all of them, the drug addiction, the homeless, all this stuff, are really grifting operations set up to extract cash from government, make the problem worse so you can justify a larger grant next time. They don't want to solve the problem because if they solve the problem, meaning reduce the problem, then what happens is they get less money next year, or arguably sometime their money supply gets cut off because you don't need them anymore. And so the nonprofits have to keep the gravy train going by making the problem worse. That's why you saw in the Redmond homeless industrial complex, a little project that they just shoved through against the people's will by the mayor. Some horrible elected people in Redmond voted for that. And the activists openly admitted they didn't have enough drug addicts in Redmond to live there, so they were going to have to recruit drug addicts and homeless people from other parts of the state to put them there to justify their multi-million-dollar grant and the grifting operations they were going to plan to have in Redmond, extracting cash from people. To the city of Kenmore, of all places, to their credit, they rejected that idea. Just the week before said, forget it. They didn't think it was a good idea. And Inslee was angry and came out there and attacked them. The elected officials, who were not Republicans, they're Democrats, attacked them for rejecting the Kenmore homeless camp project that they were going to put there. I can't remember the name of the organization right now. And why did Inslee get involved in a little local race like that? Because all the money that comes from the state and gets recycled to these groups and back into campaign contributions and funds this massive activist class that exists like parasites to suck up all the tax dollars for whatever excuse they have. It used to be just environmental issues, but now it's like homeless, industrial complex stuff. It's common. It's everywhere. None of these guys are honest people. Again, you'll have people who are starry-eyed who initially get involved, and if they look around them, they're going to become very disappointed with what they find, and they're going to reject it. These are people who become whistleblowers later on that I get to meet with. There's a lot of stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. It's just an interesting thing. So, guys, I realize I'm kind of going here, so I'm just going to start zipping through a couple of these things here. There's a bunch of people arguing back and forth here, so I'm not going to get into that. Let's see. Gordon, you got a question. Glen, my group and I did a 39-county audit of how the auditors adhere to the Washington State RCWs. No one county passed the tests. We came to the conclusion that cell phone voting. Yes, Gordon, I kind of disagree with you, though, on cell phone voting. But your audit was amazing, and that was a phenomenal audit. I think that we should promote it a little bit more. So with that, guys, I'm kind of coming to the end here. I do try to wrap this up fairly close. I know I'm a little off here. I ran over by about 11 minutes of what I would normally do, but thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next Tuesday. I'm planning to do another live stream next Tuesday. I'm going to be taking a bit of a break for 1 week after that just because of travel. But pay attention. Watch my videos. They're going to be coming out when you get them. Share them wide. I hope they're helpful. Tell me what you like and don't like underneath them. If you want to support me, feel free to do so. And you can do that on my website. It's the easiest way to do it. I've got a new logo and some other things that should be coming out pretty soon. I'm going to revamp my website quite a bit, but there's a lot of stuff going on out there. I really, really appreciate you guys logging in. I'm amazed always at the questions, and how many people are logging into this live stream. So I hope that this was helpful to you. Again, if you got more questions, come and bring them out next time, and I'll probably see you out there if you're in Okanagan or Lewis County or Kitsap County over the next few weeks. Those are at least a few of the places I'll be. And otherwise, don't forget to share this video or subscribe. And that's it. Guys, have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.